Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Every leap in American history has needed breakthrough energy.
Ignition, liftoff.
Now, AI is here, and Chevron is working to power it. We're aiming to develop multi-gigawatt power plants near data centers, designed with future pathways to lower carbon intensity. AI gets the power it needs, communities get the jobs, and the grid stays strong. Powering AI today builds America's next superpower.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy.
I'm Travis Taylor, a political scientist by training with my doctorate from the University of Kentucky and a public opinion researcher by day. I'm joined today on this episode by Dan Varroney, author of the new book, Rethinking Economic Growth, How Small Business Can Help Consistently Grow the Economy, which was published just a couple of weeks ago on September 25th. In it, Dan, with a vast knowledge of small business, public policy, and how the latter impacts the former, discusses the massive impact small business has on America's economy, the challenges small businesses face, and how policymakers can support this critical sector. Dan Varroney is a partner to policymakers, trade associations, and small businesses nationwide. He has served for over 21 years as an elected official, helping to achieve policy wins in stabilizing taxes, improving emergency response, and reducing crime. Dan is the founder of Potomac Core, which provides strategic consulting for trade association, transformation, and industry-focused partnerships. Welcome, Dan, to the Politics Guys podcast.
Thank you so much, Travis. It is a pleasure to be with you today.
It's great to have you on the show. And look, I really enjoyed reading your book. And before we jump into talking about that, I always like to start these interviews by letting the listeners kind of get to know the guest a little bit. So I read some of your bio, but tell us a little bit more about your background.
You know, Travis, I feel very blessed at a very young age. I found myself very mission driven. And probably wouldn't believe this, but at age 11 years old, I worked in my first political campaign in New York City, and it was energizing, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it because I believed that working in campaigns and helping people get elected improved the lives of real people. From that, went off to high school and college and went out and got into trade associations. I loved trade associations because I saw them as uniquely focused and mission-driven on industries. And I went to work for the National Association of Manufacturers, got to know a lot about manufacturing companies at the small, medium, and large scale, and got to learn about international trade, got to learn a lot about the plant floor and financing, and it was unbelievably illuminating. From there, went on to serve as a CEO at Association for Corporate Growth, where I learned about deal making and what deal making was about, working with investment bankers and private equity folks and corporate development executives. From there, I then went to work for Newt Gingrich, where I led his American Solutions Policy and Advocacy organization. And what was a lot of fun about that is Newt and I worked together on small business and small business policies. And over 2.5 years, met with thousands of small business owners. And it was just phenomenal how much I learned. After that, was an interim CEO at trade associations for a bit. Started my company, Potomac Core, now 13.5 years old. And I did it because I wanted to serve trade associations. Trade associations, principal mission, their core value is in policy and advocacy. Policy and advocacy creates the better business environment for companies and industries to thrive. And I built a strategic plan business and market research business to serve these industries and their trade associations. And from there, evolved into an author. My first book, Reimagining Industry Growth, came out in January of 2022. And that book was about industries building deliberate partnerships with their trade associations to better influence and shape a better business environment. And then just a couple of weeks ago, my second book was launched, Rethinking Economic Growth, the Power of Small Business here in driving our economy. So I feel very blessed that I have followed my passion and my dreams, but it's all been about the mission and serving others for me throughout my career.
Well, that's great. And it sounds like your very rich and diverse professional background has led you to write this great book on how small businesses and public policy interact. And there's always all this talk from politicians about small businesses and Main Street America and all of that. But that's kind of a perennial talking point for politicians. Tell the listeners why this is the right time in American politics and public policy for your book.
So I'm going to start with an example. I belong to, I'm sure you know who Mark Halpern is. He's the political journalist. Mark has a two-way community. And last October, Mark said to me, hey, are you going to be on our call? And I said, well, yeah. He said, I'm going to have Scott Bessent on, and I think he's going to have an important role in a Trump administration if Trump is elected 47th president. I said, sure. So I asked the president a question of Scott Bessent, and I said, Scott, thank you so much for being here as part of our community meeting. I've heard for a number of years from every politician of every political persuasion how important small businesses are. But I found that the conversation and the delivery has never been there. Could you help me understand what will be new and different in a new Trump administration? And to Scott Bessent's credit, he was fully versed about what that would be and what that would look like. And lo and behold, he has kept his word. So that's a positive example I can give you. But what really launched my interest in this book, something I'm really excited about, is consistent economic growth. Economic growth means quality of life and elevating the standard of living for every community around this country. And in my initial research, I discovered that in a window from 1961 to 2024, there wasn't a consistent economic growth. Now there was what I would call episodic growth in the Reagan and Bush administrations. There was a lot of growth in the second 4 years of the President Bill Clinton administration, but there wasn't high-level growth beyond that. There was substantial growth in the first Trump administration, but as a matter of course, 1961 to 2024, it wasn't there. So what I discovered is that small businesses represent a major footprint. They're not just a part of the economy, they are the economy. They represent almost 50% of our gross domestic product. That's exciting and it's compelling. 2 of 3 new private sector jobs that are created come from small businesses. Half the workforce comes from small businesses. 99.9% of companies in this country are small businesses. They're in every community, and they all help one another solve problems, and help one another be successful. They invest back in the community. They hire their neighbors. They hire students in between semesters. Small businesses are the economy, and we need consistent 3% growth. And this was the right place to really place my bets in terms of writing a book about how to achieve consistent 3% economic growth.
So you said that between 1961 and 2024, over this 60 plus year period, we had this episodic versus consistent growth at that 3% rate. What is it about small businesses that's so critical that will help drive that consistent rate of economic growth?
So clearly, their impact in hiring people, there's 33 million small businesses around the United States. we're currently in a deteriorating labor market. They've got the ability to lead the rebound, but what they really need is they need the policy dynamic that will help them thrive. So, for example, I'm talking on a what I would call a bipartisan basis in this conversation, and I look at policy and I look at legislation that's going to drive policy. So, when President Trump signed the Big Beautiful Law, what excited me about that new law was the 100% expensing for both plants and equipment. That energized me because in the small business interviews that I conducted, they said, we need certainty in the tax code. And that certainty would help us understand that we could invest on a regular basis. And I saw that as an opportunity to really achieve growth in the workforce and growth in the economy at 3% or larger. So that would be an example of it. But in my interviews, what I learned was that they are always looking for ways to innovate and to grow their companies and to grow their workforce. And because there's 33 million of them, they've got the platform by which that they can help rapidly address the deteriorating labor market. So I'll give you another example of that. So just a few weeks ago, I had published an op-ed on Real Clear Politics, and I said that we should ask the Fed, and the Fed should consider and deliver 350 basis point cuts in interest rates. The reason why I said that was, one, the rapidly deteriorating labor market. Two, the small business owners that I talked to said they not only needed access to capital, they needed a lower cost of capital. Lowering the interest rates lowers the cost of capital. Lowering the cost of capital means that they're going to be able to invest in the pieces of the Big Beautiful Law of plants and equipment. If they invest in plants and equipment, the magnifier effect that it has is they're going to be buying equipment from others. The other companies are going to have to hire people to design and build that equipment. They're going to have to hire more people once the equipment comes in. So you can see how that dynamic all comes together from a policy perspective. Another part of that policy perspective is that in the last administration had regulations that cost to the tune of somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4 trillion dollars. Small businesses are important. They're job creators and job adders, and they add to economic growth. So they should be looked at with a lens of, yes, they should have regulations, but let's give them scaled regulations that won't inhibit or restrict their growth. It won't restrict or inhibit their ability to hire. And that's incredibly important. So in this new administration, one of the key focuses has been the regulatory unwind. So if there's a regulation or regulatory environment that is conducive to small businesses, they're going to thrive. If there's a tax environment that's conducive to small businesses, they're going to thrive. However, if in 4 years that changes in the new administration, that's what causes episodic growth in the economy. That's what gives small businesses pause and uncertainty. And that's why some of the things that I talk about is that for every new regulation put in, that 10 ought to be taken off the books. That's why some of what I'm going to begin talking about in interviews like this and beyond this is that for small businesses, we ought to make these tax cuts, especially the expensing, 100% first-year expensing for plants and equipment, permanent. Because if we do that, there'll be a constant incentive for small businesses to invest, reinvest, and grow and hire people. So that's why I made the bet on small business. That's why I'm saying policy really matters. That's why I'm saying policy, good policy for small business. If it's certain, give small businesses confidence and they'll continue to invest and grow.
So as I was reading the book, you've got a lot of advice in there for small business owners, and you tell their stories really well. I want to get to that in just a minute. And you offer some pretty specific policy prescriptions. So it seems like the book is really geared toward those two audiences, small business owners and policymakers. This is a political science podcast. Most of our listeners are political science professors. They're in the classrooms. They're doing research. What's in this book for them, for those researchers and those teachers, those for political science students?
Travis, it's a brilliant question. So here's my answer. I'm going to start with, it's not the money, it's the money. So for political scientists, they need to look at economies, the local economy, the state economy, and the national economy, and how it grows. And when they look at it, they're going to see small business as a key contributor to that. If they understand that and they see that's where a substantial amount of job creation and economic performance comes from, they're going to share that with their students in their classes. So their students understand the following. One, that they need to understand that in the right kind of policy environment, that small businesses will thrive and the economy will thrive. So in my research, I learned that when small businesses thrive, the overall economy thrives. So for political scientists, they're encouraging their students to understand the policy implications and impact of small business. That's critically important because if economies aren't growing, there aren't sufficient revenues to provide sufficient services at the local level, state level, and national level. That's why I talk a lot about elevating the standard of living and improving the quality of life. It's not the money, it's the money. So when I say we grow consistently at the 3% level, what I'm saying is if we grow at the 3% level on a $30 trillion economy, and we're the largest economy in the world, what I'm saying is that we're adding $1 trillion of potential to invest back into the economy on an annual basis. Again, it's not the money, it's the money. So for political scientists, it's helping them see and then helping their students see that there needs to be policies both on the legislative side and the regulatory side conducive to help these small businesses thrive.
All right. I look forward to dig. You've brought up regulation a couple of times, and I'll look forward to digging into that once we get into the meat and potatoes of the book. But before we get there, I want to talk to you a little bit about the structure. You were telling me earlier in kind of our makeshift green room that you did 50 hours worth of interviews for this book. So tell me a little bit, and I really liked that interview and kind of storytelling aspect of this book. Tell me who those interviews were with and what prompted you to kind of take that interview storytelling approach to writing this book.
So there are 12 case studies. There's a representation of service industry, representation of finance, and then there's a representation of manufacturing. I have the manufacturing bug bit me, and it's now in my genes. And what I learned when I was working at the National Association of Manufacturers is that every manufacturing job created 2 or 3 service industry jobs are created. So I wanted to understand the extent to which these small businesses were manufacturers, and then how and what policies they needed to thrive, and in thriving, what that would look like for job creation, economic growth. On the service side, I looked to understand their relationship with manufacturers and how and to what extent they were collaborating with them and how they were experiencing the spillover from the manufacturing sector. And then on the finance side, the role that the finance firms were playing in giving the small businesses the affordable and access to capital they needed to keep not just functioning, but to growing. And it was fascinating because I got to see it from all sides. And my CEO group, the Strategic Guidance Lab, has over 50 trade association CEOs, and I spoke with almost all of them individually to try and understand, where the best interviews would come from. And I narrowed it down to 12. And honestly, I'd hoped to do 20, but I couldn't have gotten a book written in a reasonable time if I did 20. And I have a very strong representation as a result of that.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app? start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Introducing Meta Ray-Ban Display, the world's most advanced AI glasses. With a full color display built into the lens of the glasses, it's there when you need it and gone when you don't. Send and receive messages, translate or caption live conversations, collaborate with Meta AI, and more. Be one of the first to try Meta Ray-Ban Display. Visit meta.com/Meta Ray-Ban Display to book a demo and find your pair.
Well, I really like that storytelling approach. Stories are they've got this special connection to us that really help us understand material and help us understand kind of the bigger picture. So I really appreciated that approach to the book. I thought it was really good. We talked about this a few minutes ago. We hear a lot of talk about small business. And to be honest, when I think about small business, I think about this like trendy boutique where my wife shops downtown that has maybe 10 employees, or the barber shop where I get my hair cut that has 4 barbers. But the definition of what constitutes a small business is apparently much broader than that. And you talk about that in the book. There was one of the stories where I made a note where you talked about the number of employees. I was like, how can a business with 500 employees be small? Right? It didn't make intuitive sense to me. And so you talk about that in the book. And I want to make sure that when we talk about the book and the listeners are listening to this episode, that we're all on the same page for this conversation. So that's a really long way of asking, what the heck is a small business?
So it's a great question. So these definitions all come from the Small Business Administration. So there's a general rule of thumb, under 47,500,000 or fewer employees. But there are specific industry segments that the revenue numbers could be 50 million or slightly higher, and higher employees. It depends on the industry segment. So the Small Business Administration defines all these sectors. That's why there's a bit of confusion. But when I did selections for the interviews, I had to take extra time and care to make sure they fit within those definitions. And as you can imagine, it was a little tricky, but we did make it work. Does that make sense?
It sounds like it would be tricky. I mean, when you're relying on government definitions for something.
So we made it work. I utilized the researcher and editor that I utilized in my first book, and he and I together were able to crack the code and make sure that we're interviewing the right people.
Right.
We made it work. So the difference is, so there's a broad rule of thumb, under 47 million and under, fewer than 500 employees, but that you can get into subcategories within definitions of the SBA where those numbers change.
Yeah. So how would you help someone like me who has this kind of baked in conception of what a small business is reconcile that with considering a $47 million, 500 employee company to be considered a small business?
So I think the way to reconcile it is as follows, that when you get into the hundreds of millions of dollars, there's scale there. When you're beneath that, the scale isn't there. And I'll also share with you that on average in the United States, small businesses employ as few as 8 people. That's on average. So from my perspective, it's easy to reconcile knowing, one, that data point, and from a small business administration data perspective, understanding from my own experience and talking with thousands of companies during my career, knowing that $100 million and beneath doesn't have the scale that $500 million or $1 billion company has. So for me, it's about scale.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. So you talked a little bit about why small businesses are important to the American economy. You talked about how many jobs there are and how much of the economy they make up, but you also mentioned something called the magnifier effect. And you talk about that in almost every chapter of the book, if not every chapter. What is the magnifier effect and why is it such an important feature of the small business environment?
You know, what's interesting is that because I was a councilman in a 75 plus thousand community in Illinois, over 21 years of serving, I started to see things from a community perspective and looked at things from a community perspective. And that if you look at the United States as a nation of community, you'll see a degree of homogeneity. And you achieve that degree of homogeneity when you look at what makes them homogeneous. So clearly there's people, clearly there's schools, clearly there's hospitals and doctors and nurses and dentists and accountants, but there's something else that really comprises that homogeneity, and that is small businesses. There are small businesses in every community around this country. There are 33 million total small businesses. Why they're part of the fabric of every community is the following reason. One is they've got a multiplier effect. So how do they have a multiplier effect? So first and foremost is that small businesses help other small businesses solve problems. How are they working with suppliers? How are they interacting on challenges related to their supply chain? Are there engineering issues they're having that someone might have a better idea on? Are there things they're doing from a digital or social media perspective that they might be doing better or differently? Are there things that they might be doing better or differently to attract more skilled, qualified workers? So that would be one example. I'm going to give you another example. So when I looked at certain industries, for example, in the energy equipment space, I was struck by the following. There's a company in Alabama called MECO, and what they did very well is they said, we need trained skilled workers. So they built a partnership with local community colleges and schools over a period of time, and that created a pipeline of workers. Another example is the Calder brothers. They're in South Carolina, in Greenville County. And it's a family business started by the dad, and now the 5 Calder brothers are running this industrial business. And what was so impressive about it for me was that the Calder brothers have built relationships with trade schools, and they're literally helping them shape curriculums in a way that is delivering them an ongoing flow of skilled, qualified workers. So that's another example of the magnifier effect. And one, it's not that they're just helping their business, but they're helping other businesses get skilled, qualified workers. So they're part of the homogeneity. They're fully connected, fully integrated in the community. They help one another, and they're problem solvers, and they help the community thrive.
Dan, in July, the Gallup organization released its most recent Trust in Institutions survey results. And in that poll, small businesses are the most trusted entity in American life today. 70% of respondents said that they have a great deal or quite a lot of trust in small business. And when you include respondents who said that they have some trust in small business, that number soars to 94%. Now, at the same time, we know that everything we buy has gotten more expensive, and polls show that inflation and the economy remain the top concern for voters. And the fact of the matter is that small businesses tend to be more expensive than the big box stores, right? The local pharmacy is going to cost more than CVS. The local grocery store is going to cost more than going to Walmart. And so in this era of steep increases in the cost of living, how do you square that support that Americans have for small businesses with the pinch they feel in their pocketbooks?
Marvelous question. So every small business is sensitive to the cost of everything. So there is a cost of compliance. So in the last administration, there was regulations that cost to the tune of $1.3 or $1.4 trillion. you've got to pay for those compliance costs. It could pay for them in the form of paperwork, having to bring consultants in to help you comply. The other end of that, another component of that is energy and what they're paying for energy. Last administration, the cost of energy, both at the diesel level and at the pump, were higher. As a result of the last administration, we had inflation reach 9.3%. It was expensive not only to get workers, but to keep workers, and they had to pay workers more. So when you look at things like that, small businesses are especially price sensitive, and they more often than not they've got to pass it on. For the large enterprise, they can absorb those costs where the small businesses don't. That's why one of the things that I'm strongly advocated for is that small businesses get looked at by regulators at the national, state, and local level through a different lens, that regulations are scaled down to better suit small businesses from a cost compliance perspective. I think that's what the challenge and the opportunity is. And the other thing they'll add is the cost of capital. That interest rates from the last administration to this administration now, they're high. This administration has been advocating forcefully for lower interest rates because they hear from small businesses saying we need a lower cost of capital, and it's making our cost of operating very expensive. So when we say the trust in small business is high, it should be, but small businesses need help, and they need help on a long-term basis. So they need help with certainty. So certainty is having tax policies that give them certainty that they're not only paying taxes, but there's incentive opportunities for them to invest in plants and equipment, that there's incentives across the board, that there's other regulatory policies that are certain that don't continue to increase their costs. Their costs are stable as a result of regulations. The mistake that we're making in this country from a policy perspective, whether it be on a legislative basis or regulatory basis, is we're painting all businesses with the same brush. Businesses that have scale, well over $100 million, have got the dollars to afford compliance. The businesses that don't have the scale can't afford it, and they're passing their costs on. So that's what the small businesses are dealing with. They would love to lower their cost structures, but more often than not, they're not able to. So in this new administration, the incentive of the big, beautiful law of investing in plants and equipment at the 100% expensing level is a huge incentive. Having a low cost of capital that enables them to do that is a huge incentive. But what happens when this expires in 4 or 5 years? What happens next? That certainty goes away. So from my perspective, these tax policies that were enacted by Congress and passed by the president, from a small business perspective, should be made permanent. Let's give these small businesses certainty on the policy side from a legislative perspective and a regulatory perspective, because if we do, we're going to continue to grow jobs, we're going to continue to grow the economy, and we're going to thrive at the community level and at the national level.
For all of their talk about small businesses, do you think politicians and to some extent bureaucrats even understand the challenges that are facing small businesses?
So they will say they do, and I will tell you that every election year. So here in Virginia, this year there's a governor's election. There's a governor's election in the state of New Jersey this year, and because I'm such a political geek and a wonk, I watch the debates. Travis, right? You can get them on YouTube, and you get to see both political parties talk about how excited they are on small business. And what I've learned during my career is that there's always a disconnect over what candidates say and then what policymakers do once they're in office. And I think that for me, I want elected officials like I would love, for me, from my perspective, I care just as much what Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania thinks about this small business and reading this book as I do the Speaker of the House. Republicans and Democrats must read this book. They must understand the long-term impact, because if they do, I think this is an opportunity for them to come together for the good of the country and the good of the economy and enact laws that will help the country to grow considerably. I am energized and I am passionate about this. I want Republicans and Democrats to read this, to understand this, and to see the opportunity of growing the economy consistently if they're able to come up with scaled down regulations and laws for small businesses to comply. If they're able to invest in vocational and technical schools that will create an ongoing flow of skilled, qualified workers. I go on and on. We'd run out of time with all the examples I can give you, but small business is the ball game. Small business is how this economy grows. Small business is how this economy wins. Small business is how every community elevates the standard of living and improves the quality of life.
Ford was built on the belief that the world doesn't get to decide what you're capable of. You do. So ask yourself, can you or can't you? Can you load up a Ford F-150 and build your dream with sweat and steel? Can you chase thrills and conquer curves in a Mustang? Can you take a Bronco to where the map ends and adventure begins? Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Ready, set, Ford.
Ah, Smart Water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart Water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
How do we get politicians to stop talking and start acting? I mean, aside from sending a copy of Rethinking Economic Growth to every politician and bureaucrat in America, which actually might not be a bad idea, how do we get them to understand the challenges and issues facing American small businesses?
So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of media interviews. I'm scheduling a lot of speeches over the next 2 or 3 years to get around and get the message out. I'm also going to try and meet one-on-one with policymakers. And I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat. I want everybody to hear the same message. What was interesting, Mark Halperin, who's a political journalist, spoke at my book launch a week or so ago, and he mentioned that he had sent the book to Congressman Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat from California. Ro Khanna's a moderate Democrat. Well, I'd love to go in and meet with Ro Khanna and talk more about it with Ro Khanna. I'd love to go in and speak to the Speaker of the House and just say, I'm telling you, this is an opportunity for you and Hakeem Jeffries to come together and say, how can we come up with a permanent small business tax plan and regulatory plan that will help the entire country be successful? I mean, that's what energizes me. That's where my head is.
Well, one of the big themes of the book and in our conversation is that government should make supporting small business a priority. And that's a goal that's shared by 83% of respondents in a recent poll commissioned by the NFIB. That's the National Federation of Independent Business. So what kind of policies should the government, should the federal government and state governments enact that would help small businesses thrive?
So my recommendation would be, I'm going to offer this as a recommendation. I talked about it in my talk at the kickoff. So I believe that the administrator of small business should be elevated to cabinet secretary to secretary of small business. And the secretary of small business have a key responsibility that any new regulation or new law that comes up that's going to cost jobs or cost money for small businesses, that, she's like the zapper that says, you're going to cost jobs. So I see that as mission critical. I see a consistent, clear tax policy that encourages small business to invest in plants and equipment. I see a national investment policy in vocational and technical schools that will deliver a steady stream of workers as mission critical. I see at the state level supporting the federal legislation and regulations, coming up with tax incentives and regulations of their own to help small business be effective and successful, and then likewise at the local level. But growth is the key. We all, the national debt, I mean, it's $37 trillion. And I'm always scratching my head saying that we love to spend money in this country, but we're never really sure where it comes from. And the answer is it's not the money, it's the money. If we need more money to fund this economy, small business is a critical part of that answer. Republicans and Democrats should and must pay attention to that and come together and find ways to deliver policies that will help small businesses thrive, that will help small businesses grow jobs. The more jobs you add, the more vital local economies are. The more vital local economies are, the better the quality of life are in local economies.
So let's jump into talking about regulatory compliance. It's something that tends to be a little bit esoteric. It's something that wonks like you and me talk about, but many people don't realize how it matters to them. And you talked earlier a little bit about that with how it drives up the cost, with paperwork and consultants. But let's talk about a balance. So you talk about this a little bit in the book, and I'm going to quote the book here. You write that, quote, the continuous increase in regulations. And then you also recognize the need for oversight. You write, and again, I'm quoting here, massive, powerful, and necessary services ought not to be given free rein. So what's the balance between oversight on the one hand and, as you talked about earlier, this deregulation or this rollback of regulations on the other hand?
Travis, everybody talks about sound science, but one of the things I learned when I worked for the National Association of Manufacturers is that manufacturers care a lot about people. People meaning the workers in their plants. They care about the people that they sell to. They care about their retailers and distributors. And safety is tantamount in everything they do. So the answer is, how do we use, and I know this is an overused phrase, but how do we use some level of science or sound science to develop worker safety standards and product safety standards that work on a general basis in a way that are not onerous to the point that we are pushing small business owners to the wall? That would be an example of it. And I think there's a way to get people to convene. I think through the Small Business Administration, if they were to convene 100 small business owners from different sectors of the economy around the country, and they spend a week with them, they can identify different regulations that are what I call pinch points. What are the things that are going to drive up your costs? The same thing can be done at the state level and the local level. And we need to just get on it and stop talking about it. Because if we get on it and stop talking about it, we are going to create an economy by which that will grow as far as the eye can see.
So you write about preemption in the book, this idea that state governments should be setting regulations for the whole state rather than letting local governments regulate or enact rules that are stricter or contradictory to state regulations. And then later on, you write that the federal government should require states to adopt this preemption approach. So we can't even get Congress to pass a budget to keep the government open. So just practically speaking, how do you accomplish something like this?
Great question. So let me just give you a little bit of behind the scenes here. So in interviews that I did for the book and client work that we do, some of what we're learning is that where states were getting more ambitious and aggressive on the regulatory level, that has now spilled into the local level. And it's creating higher costs. It's creating more confusion. It's creating more uncertainty. So if there is a national standard, let's say, or a state standard, you're not going to have the ability of municipalities to go rogue, as it were, and create things that well exceed the standard. You want to come up with what I would call standards based on reasonableness that is based on safety for people, safety for the community, and we want to make sure that we evaluate and develop that safety standard. So I'm a partnership personality. I believe that you can put the regulators in the room. I believe you can put the small businesses in the room. I believe you can put elected officials in the room, and you can say, how do we get there? First, you start from an outside-in perspective. What do the small businesses say are the pinch points? And you just get people to listen, and then utilize that feedback as data point to establish the reasonableness standards.
All right. I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about one of the other major challenges that you've mentioned small businesses are facing. That's the issue of taxes. So in the book, you advocate for, and on the show today, you've advocated for a simplified tax structure that provides a level of certainty. And you write that in the book that you want a tax structure that raises enough revenue without being overly burdensome or ruining our international competitiveness. Enough revenue for what?
So when we talk about revenue, again, I'm a community-focused person. There is quality of life and standard of living. We need a quality of life by which we're providing services at the local level, fire, police, paramedic, and police as well, services at the national level that include things for retirees like Social Security and Medicare, that we're able to provide Medicaid for those fortunate that can't afford to do for themselves, that we're providing for national defense, that we're providing federal law enforcement for those things that help keep the entire country safe, preventing drugs to get too deeply into our communities, preventing dangerous criminals and fugitives from getting into our communities, having a national defense that sends a message to the world that we are going to protect ourselves and we are going to protect our people. So it's that kind of thing, understanding what those dollars look like. So from my perspective, that as a country, as a society, that our students should be able to get out of grade school and high school and be able to make a decision that they can go and pursue a career in trade and do very well, which we know statistically we can, or they can pursue other professional careers through a college degree or an advanced degree. But we need an education system that can do that. So you've got to have the right money, the right policy, and the right focus to do that as well.
Okay. I'm going to circle back to workforce in just a minute. When I was doing my master's program in political management, I had a professor, a guy I think you know, Dr. David Rare,
yes,
who was an association director. And he told us one night in class, and I don't know why this stuck with me, but it always has. He told us that one of the biggest concerns of his association's members, most, if not all of them, small family-owned businesses, was the so-called estate tax, what your former boss, Newt Gingrich, called the death tax. Do you hear much about that in your work now? What kind of role does that death tax play in how small businesses prepare for the future?
What I've learned by working at NA, the National Association of Manufacturers, that I learned working with Newt Gingrich, and what I've learned in the last 13 and a half years, I've now interviewed over 2,000 leaders, most of them small business owners. And what's been interesting to me is that you've got a lot of small businesses. So what we want is to make sure that their estates aren't taxed to the point that these families can't reinvest in the business. So when we talk about certainty, you want those families to have the ability to take what was left to them and reinvest back into the business. So look at it from a today perspective. So think about AI, think about automation, think about all the productivity enhancement tools that are coming into the marketplace that can make a difference for small businesses. If we can either reduce or eliminate the estate tax, those small businesses are going to have the ability to invest substantially back into their businesses. If they have the ability to invest substantially back into their businesses, there's going to be more hiring. More hiring means more jobs. More jobs mean more growth in the economy. 70% of the economy is of our economy nationally is consumer driven. The more people working, the more they have the capacity to buy. So if there's 33 million small businesses and a chunk of them are privately owned, we want them to be able to keep some or actually most or all of that money to reinvest back in the business.
All right, let's talk about the one of the biggest challenges that you've mentioned repeatedly. You talk about it throughout the book, and that's issue of workforce. So for a lot of years now, there's been this major emphasis in American high schools that students not only be college ready, but that college is the only real path to success. How has that mindset impacted small businesses?
Well, it's impacted small businesses dramatically for a few reasons. And it has narrowed the pool of workers. So for a very long time, we built a bias in this country that you needed a 4-year degree to thrive and also to make a wage that you could either support yourself or raise a family with. And lo and behold, uh, now we're learning that there are people with 4 years degrees that either can't get jobs or they're getting very low paying jobs. At the same time, we're learning about industries like the HVAC, HVAC industry, or the electrician arena, or plumbers or data folks. You could work for technology companies and get like a 2-year certificate that you can make out of high school, get some type of apprenticeship and build into that 60, 80, $100,000 plus job in a 5 to 7 year window, which is very compelling and very exciting. And the second part of that is that we moved away in this country from investing in our vocational and technical schools because we believed the path to the golden goose was the 4-year degree. And now we know that that in fact is not true. So there needs to be a hard look at vocational and technical education in a way that gives solid path forward for individuals, for men, women, anyone who wants to go into a vocational or technical career to do that.
In the book, you tell this truly incredible story that just demonstrates how entrepreneurial and just caring small business owners are. It's a story about Lincoln Electric, Norton, and Juergens and their foray into the second chance reentry space. Obviously, I want the listeners to buy the cow, so don't give the milk away for free here, but give them a little taste of this story, which, again, is one of many just fantastic stories in the book.
So, problem solvers, small businesses are problem solvers, which is why I love small businesses. By the way, I'm a small business owner myself. What I was taken by, we hear about a lot of problems and we hear a lot of political crossfire every day. But one of my greatest, if not the greatest takeaway in the book was, so 2/3 of nonviolent offenders can't find work. They can't find work, and it causes a high degree of recidivism.
And let's really drive that point home. We're talking about nonviolent offenders here, right? We're talking about people that aren't out there hurting other people.
Correct.
These are folks that are, and they can't find work.
And they can't find work. So what I was struck by in these small businesses in the greater Cleveland area is they went to the prosecutor and the county officials and said, we want to work with you to build a program for nonviolent offenders. They did that, and they reduced the recidivism rate in their area, in their county, by 25 or 30%. So I'm going to tell you, one, small businesses find problems and fix problems. And they not only find problems and fix problems for themselves, they find and fix problems for their communities that elevate the standard of living and the quality of life. So as we think about how we can improve situations for nonviolent offenders, this is a way to do that in counties and communities around the country. But know that small businesses have played a meaningful role in doing that and addressing their workforce needs.
Truly a great story. Dan, if you could have the listeners close out this episode of the Politics Guys and walk away with just one or two critical takeaways, what would they be?
Small business is the economy. They're not a piece of the economy. And the second thing is that they need to go to Amazon and to buy the book and utilize it in their coursework. Because if they do that and they utilize it in their coursework, their students are going to be better able to understand how these small businesses make up the fabric of the communities and how they drive the local, state, and national economies.
Dan, I really appreciate the opportunity to read your new book and to talk to you today and to have you share your story with the listeners. Thanks for joining me today on the Politics Guys.
It's a pleasure, and look forward to coming back another time.
Look forward to the next book. Again, that was Dan Varroney, author of the new book, Rethinking Economic Growth, How Small Businesses Can Help Consistently Grow the Economy. And it's available right now wherever you buy books. That ends this episode of the Politics Guys. If you're not a supporter of the Politics Guys, if you want to have more interviews with amazing authors like Dan, you should become a supporter. Supporting the show gives you access to all kinds of benefits, like access to these episodes without any of the advertisements or any of the interruptions. But there's so much more to being a supporter of the Politics Guys. It includes being part of our very active Discord group and all kinds of other benefits. So if you want to support great interviews like this one on Rethinking Economic Growth, head on over to patreon.com/thepoliticsguys right now. Take a look at all the different levels of support and the different options you'll have to support the show, support the mission, and support the guys behind the podcast. Again, go to patreon.com/politicsguys because shows like this are only possible with your support. And if you'd like to support us in other ways, we are on Venmo @politicsguys, and you can also support the show through PayPal. All of those support links are in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. If you want to buy the book, Rethinking Economic Growth, you'll also find a link to do so in the show notes. If you'd like to be any kind of member, but you just can't support us right now, we totally get that. We'd love to have you share, subscribe, rate, and review this episode in whichever podcast app you use and on social media. If you've got a question, comment, correction, anything else you'd like to share with us about the book, the interview, or anything else we do at Politics Guys, drop us a line at mail@politicsguys.com. You can also reach us on Facebook and X. You can find all of those links, you guessed it, in the show notes. I'd like to give a huge thanks to our executive producers here at the Politics Guys, Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Marie Miller. And of course, a special thanks goes to you, our listeners. The other guys will be back with a full episode this weekend, and I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.